we are going to talk about one of the most intriguing aspects of international relations these days, and that is the American, actually, you should call it the flip flop policy, uh, which is can also be called, also known as American policy. The flip flop policy, also known as American policy. And we see that all the time. Let me put the context to it. We saw a great bonhomie to begin with. The bonhomie was such that Biden put India well after several other nations. And of course, they said, okay, NATO comes first and all that. Then, of course, there was much warmth, and we saw a Quad summit. And immediately after the Quad summit, we saw what's called, I shouldn't take the name of that particular animal, Lloyd Austin coming to India and doing defense and also preaching to the defense minister, or was it the foreign minister, the virtues of religious freedom. And we know, Richard knows very well, Richard will explain what religious freedom means actually for the US. And then, of course, we had the what is called the freedom of navigation forays, the great freedom of navigation voyage. And then, uh, then what do we have? Then, of course, we always have that. We always have the subtext of the CATSA sanctions. That's always there. And now we have the vaccine, the DPA, the what is called the Defense Protection Act or Production Act. What is it called? DPA, of course, I know DPA, and which India rightly calls as an export ban because it's a very, very thin fig leaf that America was wearing. And then suddenly America says that, okay, we when we were in a bind, India helped us, and here we are, all for India. So, shall we begin with Ruchir? What's all this going on? I am completely flummoxed. Of course, Vibhuti Ji knows better uh, because he is right there. He is with the policymakers. He is the American. So let's start with the not so American, Ruchir Sharma. What do you have to say about all this, the flip flop policy, also known as American policy?
Right. So I think what we should start with is many people say the way that the US or its allies, NATO or the Western world, the way they act reeks of hypocrisy. But as a very perceptive bunch of intellectuals have pointed out, it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. That when you're powerful enough, as the hegemonic superpower, you can make the rules. That's why they, love this term rules-based international order, because who made the rules? It was them. And he who makes the rules also reserves the right to ignore the rules. Now, the rules are designed to protect the power of the powerful countries and to prevent the rise of any challenges. Now, the behavior we've seen around the US and its vaccine diplomacy is not out of character if you look at it from this perspective, from a realist foreign policy perspective, that the country doesn't really have much to gain from vaccine diplomacy in the way that a country like India does, or a country like Russia does, or a country like China does, where they use vaccines as a way to promote goodwill in spheres outside of their influence, for example. So, for example, India was providing vaccines to countries in the Caribbean, Barbados, for example, which were not really on the radar of the EU or the Western world as such. Now, the US has had a very consistent position since Biden came to power and made a big domestic push for controlling the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a result, the White House consistently, when asked, what will you be doing to help other countries? Will you be sharing the vaccine? X country is going through a crisis. Y country is going through a crisis. They consistently say that our priority is to vaccinate as many American citizens as quickly as possible. And amidst the last week or so of unpleasantries between the US government and the Indian public, I'll say, uh, there was one statement which really rubbed people the wrong way. And that was when an American journalist asked Ned Price, so the spokesperson for the US Department of State, the foreign ministry, about US export restrictions. And he said that the administration has a special responsibility to the American people who have been hit harder than any country around the world. And it's not only in our interest to see Americans vaccinated, it's in the interests of the rest of the world to see Americans vaccinated. So, what does this mean? Now, this is again that not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy, that the lives of Americans are more important than the lives of people in the rest of the world. And it's the onus is on us. We need to acknowledge that, oh, yes, of course, they have the first right to resources. And around this, there are two diplomatic moves which are completely within the power of the US government to change if they wanted to. One, at the World Trade Organization, a group of developing countries led by India and South Africa have been pushing for a temporary waiver of intellectual property around COVID 19 vaccines that will allow for production and scaling and supply to countries that currently are not scheduled to get vaccines until next year. This has the support of a majority of nations, but is being blocked by the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the European Union. And why is that? Because it's a threat to their pharmaceutical industry. Now, the second policy move that they did was, as Sanjay ji mentioned, they used a defense act to restrict the export of raw materials that are needed by other countries to produce the vaccines themselves. And this includes things like petri dishes and test tubes as well. And unfortunately, some of the raw materials that they have embargoed the export for, there's no other capacity independent of the US sphere that other countries can tap into. Even Russia is facing the same issue. And if you try to get the same raw materials from the EU, they won't do it. The European Union is also scared of repercussions from the US. Now, you've blocked the move, through standard multilateral channels at the World Trade Organization. B, commercially, there is a private company that it's trying to buy raw materials to produce it in India, and you've stopped that export, citing some defense law, some defense act and protocol. And this creates a sophisticated form of diplomatic blackmail where you restrict the ability of other countries to be self reliant or to be engaging in vaccine diplomacy as we were. That by restricting the raw materials, it's exactly when India is going through a crisis of the second wave, when we are desperate. What is the outcome that the stronger player wants here? That, why should we sell you raw materials where the margins are lower when we can sell you vaccines themselves, sell you the finished product? This is traditional East India Company style colonialism, mercantilism, imperialism. And this was something that many people within India caught on and started challenging US government spokespeople. And that led to a lot of pressure. And there was an article published just a couple of hours ago by a fellow of the Brookings Institution. It's in the Atlantic, where he claims that there was a big argument within the White House, and there were two teams on the foreign policy team. One which was saying, oh, we need to prioritize Americans. The other saying that if you keep doing this, if you keep blocking the exports, if you keep refusing to send aid, then it causes a reinforcement of the existing opinion that people have in India, that the US is not a reliable partner, let alone ally. And this was made even worse by US official spokespeople saying, when they tweeted or when they gave speeches, that they stood in solidarity with our friends and partners in the US and never mentioned the government, didn't mention the people unless really, really pushed. And now, after they were called out on that, so Biden himself has now tweeted, or Kamala has tweeted. Now you still have people, still have experts from the saying, "Oh, look, Biden tweeted twice. Aren't you slaves happy? What more does it take to address your lingering concerns?" That, quite frankly, Biden's words don't matter; actions do, and the actions have been consistent for the past few months.